Well, good afternoon, everybody. As people are joining, very welcome to join us. Ooh, crowds coming in. Very welcome to join us for today's resolution roundtable. Just give people a chance to get in through the door. Okay, there's a very large number of sign-ups. I think we'll probably have a few people join in the next 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm Mike Talbot. I'm the founder and CEO of UK Mediation, for those who don't know. And we started running these events. This is the fourth of these events, looking at basically reflective practice and giving people a chance to come along with their own war stories of mediation cases they've worked with and to hear about other people's war stories and have a bit of a discussion about best practice, any sort of dilemmas, any critical incidents that you might have had in your mediation cases, a chance to do that in a sort of roundtable setting as far as we can virtually, and to hear from me, somebody with quite a few years experience doing mediation and with my own sort of track record with UK mediation. We're in our 25th year, so we've done 1 or 2 mediation cases between us with our panel of currently about 14 people on the panel. So we've had a lot of case material. I'm very glad to sort of share any insights that I can or any reflections I can on your own work. So it's crucially important with these events, with the roundtable events, to hear from you. I'm not going to broadcast or lecture on this event. You'll be pleased to hear. So what I want to do is to hear from you about anything really that you've been working on, cases that went well, didn't go so well, something you learned, something you tried in terms of your own mediation practice. Just in case you've not been on one of these before, obviously we have to keep things confidential. So please, no names, obviously, no sort of identifying places of employment or geographical locations. Don't say where people come from or who they work for. And don't mention names, and no very specific details so that you couldn't quite identify who you're talking about. Okay, so we try and keep it to a level of anonymity. So there's no way, even if the participants in your mediation were watching today, they wouldn't notice, they wouldn't be able to recognize that it was they that you're speaking about, that you're talking about. We like to have cameras on, interactive event. It's good to be able to see people, have a bit of a discussion as though we were in the room together. So if you're able to put your camera on, that'd be great. So who'd like to give us a story, some piece of work you've done, some mediation case you've worked on or tried to work on, maybe something that's in the pipeline that you've just had referred that you're thinking about doing, or some learning point from a case, however long ago, doesn't matter. Some material for the rest of us to have a think about and a talk about, and a bit of a sort of a roundtable discussion about it. So who'd like to go first? It's good if you can use the hand up thing to sort of just so we know who's next. And I'll turn to you and we'll hear from you. Tracy. So let's hear from Tracy first. That'd be great. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Mike. Hi. It's a really complicated one, so I'm just going to try and sort of describe it in a nutshell. And I was just thinking as you were talking, to try and keep the anonymity.
Yeah.
I might have to leave a bit of detail out, which might also add to the confusion for anybody listening to it. So just please bear that in mind. So I was asked to do a 3-way mediation. I've never done a 3-way mediation before. I didn't really even know how this thing would work, but it all stemmed from 2 people having difficulties with person number 3.
Yeah.
So I met with the first person who was having difficulties. And they told me, so I'm really cutting this down into a nutshell. They told me that they'd put in a bullying complaint about this person 3, and it's not being dealt with. So obviously I've got alarm bells going on here. So I'm thinking, oh, should I carry on with this? Should I not? And, I think this is something that I'm always struggling with, because I want to solve their problems with them. and I want to help them, but sometimes I don't know whether I am too willing, and sometimes I should be sort of putting a stop to it. So that was person number one. Then I met with person number two, who said, I've put in a discrimination complaint in and it's not been dealt with. These complaints, by the way, were not like official complaints. These complaints were just verbal and what I don't know, get a sense of whether or not they wanted to make it official and take it through that route. I think it's one of those cases where they want the manager to do something about it, but they don't really want any comeback, that type of thing. Then I met with person number three, who was the person that they were having difficulties with. I thought, this is going to be really difficult. It was really difficult. The person said to me, if these people are having difficulties with me, why have they never approached me themselves? Why has it come to this? I have no idea really what you're talking about, and all of that. However, in this mediation meeting with person number three, I was struggling even with this person. So normally in mediation, I find everybody is very reasonable, even the most difficult people that I've heard about. But this person was getting on my nerves. And in the it was a cultural thing, and the person said this is a cultural thing. From the country that they're from, this is the type of person I am. And they said, I prefer directness. Well, they never ever stopped talking, and I couldn't get a word in edgeways, as in, you know, the process of the mediation, what would happen next, what I'm wanting to hear from you. It was just boom, boom, boom. I was bombarded completely. So I had to say, you told me you want me to be direct, so I'm going to be direct with you. And I felt I was being a bit strict. I was very, very direct, as in, you know, I'm struggling here with you type thing. I didn't say that, but anyway, the mediation is now put on hold. We got a message from their manager. It's put on hold. I think there's a few things need to be sorted, which is good, because I think there's a realization now that mediation was not the solution to this first instance. So I reckon it will come back round.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's just so many things I was dealing with there, really, in terms of my feelings, you know, whether I should do a three-way mediation, which was the way to approach it, and also when do I push back when I think really I'm getting a sense of this is not right.
Okay. Just a couple of points. Are you like an external mediator, or are you doing this within your own organization?
Internal.
You're internal. Okay. So there's that sort of contextual thing that often makes a difference. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, I do have thoughts, but let me throw it out there to anybody else who's just heard from Tracy about three-party mediation. So the first party's made a not yet formalized bullying complaint against party three. Second person's made a not yet formalized discrimination complaint against party three. And then Tracy had some challenges in your interaction with party three. You were having to dig deep, by the sound of it, to be assertive with them and to even get a chance to tell them what mediation was about, to decide whether it was going to progress. And I think Tracy's question is, you know, does it sound like mediation might have been the right thing? It's going to come back round to you, you believe, but I guess you were thinking, if I'm hearing you correctly, you know, is mediation the right way to go with this? And should not these complaints be looked at possibly before or possibly in parallel with the mediation? So I've got my own thoughts, like I say, but let's hear from our assembled round table. Annette, let's hear from you, please. It'd be great if we could see you as well. Hi, how are you doing? Whereabouts are you, Annette, by the way? You're muted at the moment, Annette.
Thank you. Yes, I'm trying to manage the bandwidth, so I will go off again. But yeah, I thought that I had often from workplace mediations is that a lot of them come with bullying or discrimination, but then when you listen to them, there's actually something very different behind it. And so often I think it's good if those so-called bullying things come to mediation, because often it's not actually the bullying that is the problem. There may have been some bullying, but that is rarely the real problem. The other thing I wondered about, and I had a similar situation, was whether you should make two out of it, rather than have a three-way. Yeah. Have them, that person, that offender in quotation marks, and one of them, and then the other one separate. Unless they really sort of hang together, these other two, because that will avoid that you have the 2 against 1 situation to manage. And also, if one is very chatty, to put it mildly, then it might be easier to manage if you just got 2 people there. If you have the chance, maybe get a second mediator in. That can sometimes help with those, especially if you feel sort of personally that you said, yeah, it was getting on your nerves. Then I think that can also be helpful.
Okay, brilliant. So you're wondering, Annette, whether you should do two ways or a 3-way, even get an extra pair of hands in if you're finding it's difficult to manage the whole thing, but also that quite often people will come with that kind of language about bullying, about harassment, about discrimination, as well as a lot of isms. People come along and say this is ageist, this is racist, this is sexist, it's to do with gender or ability status, and they'll often come with the isms. But when we don't necessarily collude with the allegations, of course, as mediators. We're about getting a dialogue going. Any other thoughts before I give you my own thoughts from our roundtable? Around the table, anybody else got any thoughts about Tracy's one? Okay. For me, yes, the B word, bullying, is often there. Now, bullying is a very serious thing. It can end people's careers. It can impact very, very negatively on people's mental health. It's serious. It's not a thing that we can brush aside at all. And there are, in a lot of organizations, people who are loose cannons who, we could label with this or that personality disorder even, who are very damaging to the individuals and to the organization. Real big problem, needs to be weeded out, needs to be investigated at times. Sometimes that word gets thrown around, and people can use the word bullying because somebody spoke to them harshly once, because they felt excluded from a conversation once, because they were mentioned in an email in a negative way once or even twice. We don't need to judge that as mediators. What we do need to ask ourselves the question of is, are people participating voluntarily? I always bring it back to basics like that. Are they there voluntarily? Do we have something here that can be resolved through having a dialogue? Can I maintain my impartiality? Part of the impartiality, of course, Tracy, is noticing when your buttons are pushed in. If somebody is bugging you and at the back of your mind, you're thinking, you know what, I probably wouldn't warm to this person outside of this setting. And as you know, we have to, one of the hardest pieces of work we have to do as mediators is to maintain our impartiality, despite people pushing our buttons in, or despite, sort of impacting in that more profound way on us. My own judgment about this, just hearing that little bit, and I appreciate you worked very hard there, Tracy, to make sure you're not identifying anything or anyone. There's probably more to it, I imagine. But in what I've heard there, I would be pretty keen, if they were willing to do it, to get them all together. We, of course, would need to be quite assertive in terms of making sure that you've been given time to get across the messages about mediation, tell the person what the boundaries are, what the purpose of the intervention is, make sure they understand what we're there to do, which does, require that you dig deep with your own assertiveness. But ultimately, provided there was no risk issues and there's no chance that we're going to do more harm than good, which is always a red flag, then I would be inclined to get the 3 of them together. We've always got the possibility within the model to put people into side rooms. We can always revert to shuttle, but essentially, I would love to get the 3 of them in a room and get the dialogue going. And I'd be inclined to do that before any formal process. I think culturally, in a lot of organisations, we tend to go to the formal process, and as soon as Bullying is mentioned, discrimination is mentioned, the big bell rings up in the HR department, and we get into an investigation, which I have spent the last 30 odd years saying to people, probably not a good idea. Let's see if we can solve it with a conversation. And your party three is coming to their individual meeting, Tracy, saying, well, why haven't they spoken to me? What are they all talking about? And I think that'd be a brilliant starting place, just to find out what they're talking about. And even if we have to stop the mediation short or postpone it, I'd be very inclined to start it and start to get the dialogue moving, because I think you could get to a good place just by making a conversation happen. But yes, it does draw on our own personal resource to remain assertive, to make sure that we're not reacting to our own buttons being pushed in, or our own sort of our own triggers. But yeah, I'd be inclined to get the conversation going.
I think I agree with that, Mike, that could have worked. I mean, I didn't quite get to that stage because and in fact, I was wondering how to do it. I probably would have done one-on-one and then one-on-one, and then if that worked, maybe bring them all together, something like that. But actually, I think bringing them all together could have worked, as long as I was managing it really, really well. So it wasn't looking as though the two had got together and colluded, and it was a bit more of a battle. Yeah.
Which for me would be a contraindication for doing 2-2s. I get it. Annette's saying, there is that possibility of doing 2 one-to-one meetings, but that kind of buys into the allegations and says, you're the problem, and we just want to hear what problem party one's got with you and what problem party two's got with you. I'd be averse to that, because if it looks like you're sort of colluding. So I would say, you've all got the same responsibility to make this situation better.
Yeah, especially this person 3 came in with the belief that everybody was colluding, so that might have helped. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, I often say go back to basics. I think our impartiality, treating everybody equally, getting them together in a setting of a 3-party mediation, even that, I think, brings about some kind of a shift in the party's thinking, where they can see that you're not there to sort of back up allegations or investigate or to advocate on the side of the victim. No, we don't do any of that. What we are there to do is to very impartially support everybody equally and get a dialogue going on the basis of a shared responsibility for making this situation better. Yeah. Okay, that's how I'd look at it.
Thank you.
Nice one, Trace. Thanks very much. Lynn, you've been very patient. You had your hand up a little while ago. So shall we hear from Lynn? You had some comments about that case. Let's hear about that if we've not missed the moment. Whilst we're waiting for you to get on, Lynn, the question you popped in there, you said, do you ask the individuals to do any prep? And also, you said something else. Okay, let's hear from you then, Lynn. Are you there, Lynn Gibson? Okay. Not hearing from you, Lynn, not to worry.
Just before, just while Lynn's coming on, just to add something else into the mix.
Back to you, Tracy, yeah.
Sorry, what I found out of person number 3 is that they've got a whole host of other problems, like, for instance, they are on a short-term contract, and they're extremely worried about that coming to an end. They've also got other things where they have to have a certain license to practice, and that license, because they are from another country, is not forthcoming. So there's all sorts of things that are making this person tense.
Okay. So, there are drivers that incline people to want to resolve the dispute. Sometimes there are drivers that incline them not to want to resolve the dispute, but that, by the sound of it, gives them a much stronger imperative to want to get it done. Yeah. Okay. I do think, as it's come back to you, the other thought I did have is, if you do have another mediator in the organisation, Tracy, somebody you can double up with, it's absolutely fine if you want to, which was Annette's suggestion. And if you're finding it's difficult to manage any of the individuals or any of the interactions with the individuals, it's fine to double up and work with a co-mediator, preferably somebody that you know quite well and can trust. So as you're not having to manage your interactions with the co-mediator as well as having to manage what's going on in front of you, which sounds like quite a bit. But yeah, get a second mediator in if you're
that
worried
was going to
about.
be another challenge that I brought about co-mediators, but I'll leave that one for now.
Okay. That's great. No, thanks ever so much. It's often difficult to bring material where it's not sort of come to a pretty conclusion. You know, it's easy for us all to bring cases along and go, you know what, everything went perfect in this case, and I got to a wonderful point, and they got an agreement, and everything's grand. It's much harder to bring along stuff that didn't quite get there. There's a few people in the chat box saying they're not sure how to raise their hand to chip in. You'll find it in the buttons down the bottom. Along, if you move your mouse, you should see the buttons down the bottom appear. It'll be down there. Okay, thanks ever so much, Tracy. Let's hear from someone else. Right, who else has got some material, a case that you'd like to bring? Yeah, if you click the Scott's just reminded us, if you click the react button down the bottom, that gives you a chance to put your hand up anyway. So, which Dawn has. So Dawn, let's hear from you.
Hi there. Yeah. So at the moment I'm struggling with cases, 5 of them are in conflicts. They're very senior managers. 3 of them started in November. 2 started in November, so we've already got a divide there. It appears that the 3 that started don't know why the other 2 were brought on. They feel that they're sort of treading on their toes, etc. So this is sort of trundled on for quite a while, and it all came to a head in July, where one person accused 3 of them of bullying. They ended up slamming the laptop down, banging the wall, and walking out. Okay, so that person wanted to then raise a grievance, so we decided to do mediation or facilitation. So 2 of us went in as facilitators. Half an hour before the meeting, we were told that they believed they no longer needed mediation, but we decided to shorten the meeting rather than 3 hours to an hour, just to find out, you know, has it been resolved? If so, what has changed since this incident in June happened? 3 of them sort of wasn't really talking, although we were trying to prompt people to talk. 2 of them were very vocal. One was the person that slammed the laptop, and the other one who she accused of being the bully. They were the 2 vocal ones. And it was literally towards the end of the meeting, the one who was accused of being a bully then demanded that they wanted an apology. And that was the only way they were going to get past it. And then the others then spoke up and said, well, they also wanted an apology for her behaviour and accusing of being bullies and things like that. So the person turned around and said, well, I'm sorry if I made you feel that way, blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, that's not a proper apology. So we kind of brought it to a close because we weren't getting anywhere. And the feedback that we got was that the mediation actually made it worse because it's brought the feelings back to the forefront, because this incident happened in June, July, and we've only now done the mediation. I really don't know where to go with this one, to tell you the truth. Whether we split them up into groups, but then I would have to do, like, you know, one with each of the people and then go to another person with each of the people so they all have time with each other, or I just don't know really.
Okay.
Sort of at a loss. Yeah.
So we've got 5 individuals, 3 of them not talking, allegations of bullying, people insisting on apologies. The what's the word? The non-apology being given. I'm sorry if you felt that way.
Yeah.
Which is always a tricky one. You're doing it with a co-mediator, Dawn. By the sound of it, it sort of, we didn't get to a very good place. But then the people are saying mediation made it worse because it's resurfaced things, but we haven't been able to deal with them. You're wondering where to go with it next, really. So
basically, yeah.
Brett,
and it didn't make it worse. All they've done is hidden their feelings. That's all they've done.
That's all they've done.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. Thanks very much. So again, another one. These are hard to bring these because they're not sort of very pretty. They're not the ones that came to a great conclusion. Everything worked well, and you know. So these are tricky ones to bring. Brett, was your comment about Dawn's case? Let's hear from Brett. Let's see what your thoughts are.
Hello, that's my last name. Debbie's first name.
Oh, well, okay. Debbie, have you got, if you could put your camera on, it'd be great.
I'm in an office.
All right.
So I would definitely do one-on-one, because obviously the ones who want to talk are not talking because of who they're sat in front of, and I've had that before. A joint one doesn't always work out best first time. It's trying to get people to actually say what's wrong and what the problem is, and they're never going to do that I have found, while they're sat there in front of the people that have upset them.
Presumably you did individual meetings first, Dawn. You met privately with each individual. What were you gleaning, just to build on Debbie's comment there, what were you gleaning about what was the conversation they needed to have? What were the needs and interests of the individuals, do you think?
Well, it seems like the 3 that joined earlier in the team, for whatever reason, are against the other 2. Yeah. One of the other 2, they're the ones that have accused the 3 of bullying.
Yeah.
And I believe, obviously I didn't share this, I do believe there is some truth to that. But yeah, I don't think the line manager probably handled it well. He's kind of let it festered as well, because all of this seems to have started soon, straight off the bat, from December when they joined till now, September, when we've tried to go in and do the mediation. So
so like Debbie says, it can be quite challenging, particularly if people are new and don't have that rapport with the colleagues, don't know them particularly well, do they? So with a trusted colleague that you got very used to, and they're used to you, who you've been around for a year or 2 or some period of time, it's a lot easier to address difficult topics. But when you're in a room with five people, the 4 others, as it were, it's kind of difficult. So I always say to people, it might be that when you got it like a 5, it might be that instead of getting everybody together straight away, you may do a subgroup. You might do a 3 or a 2, or even probably not a 4, because then the 5th person will feel excluded, but a 3 or a 2. You've got to manage it carefully. You've got to prime people for this. So right at the start of your individual meetings with people, I would say it's possible that after this bit of time, and after the same bit of time with each of your colleagues, that we, the mediators, decide to bring 3 of you together, or 2 of you together, 4 of you together. Just make sure they know that.
Right.
Because otherwise, the way that the individuals can frame it is that, we all had a chat with the mediator, and then she excluded me from the group meeting. And it can feel like that. So we've got to get the frame correct on that and say, no, we want to give it the best chance of success, which might involve having a 2 or a 3 before we get everybody together. So there is that possibility, like Debbie's suggesting, to lessen the intensity by just having a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 or a 3-way conversation first before we get everybody together. Also, I'm just thinking context is everything. And by the sound of it, there's been a decision made, which is not just on the basis of the little bit of information we've got there. Sounds like it wasn't all that well managed. So you've got 2 people who've been parachuted into an established management team by the sound of it. Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
And it's not been well done, has it? I mean, people should.
Yeah, I think they should have outlined what everyone's roles be and how they interact with each other. But
sure.
Yeah.
And as a general point, I won't make it specific to that situation, but as a general point, I think sometimes we see mediation being misused. And one misuse of mediation is when there have been poor management decisions or poor personnel decisions and employee relations decisions made, and then to try and mop it up, we get the referral to mediation. And actually what it needs is a different intervention. So what we can do in mediation, I'm often reluctant to say all we can do, but because it's quite a lot, but all we do in mediation is get a conversation going. And we establish people's needs and interests. We work impartially and privately, and we get a dialogue building. So we find out if there's some way that we can build a dialogue using our skills to support equally each of the parties in the dialogue, so that everybody gets what they want, and so that they're able to exercise their shared responsibility to make a situation better. Now, often that involves bringing resentments to the table, bringing to the table different versions of, why I'm so annoyed about the current situation. But You know, they have to want to do that. And then once we've done that, we can then move from the present into the future and say, okay, how do things need to be different? So, you know, there's a 3-sentence summary of everything that mediation does. But what we can't do is change management decisions. What we can't do is rewind mistakes, employee relations mistakes. What we need to sometimes do also is to include more people than they suppose should be included. So I might even, part of my thinking is the manager or managers who made the decision to bring these two in, what was on their minds, I might be tempted to try and include those in the mediation.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. Yeah.
Because they might have their own views about what should happen here. They may need to explain their thinking about how come they've apparently just parachuted these two new individuals into this place. They may have a responsibility themselves for making this situation better.
Yeah.
Maybe if they have the power and the authority to change or tweak the decision they've made to do it this way, maybe they might change their minds and think maybe that, you know, perhaps that wasn't such a good idea to have done it this way. So I would be quite tempted, the more I'm talking myself into it, I'll be quite tempted to invite in the people who've made the decision to set up this situation, because they might well have some issue, or they might have some of their own interests around that. Maybe not to lose face.
Yeah.
Maybe they've made a mistake. There's always that possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point, actually. No, thanks for that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dawn. Thanks ever so much for bringing that one. And you know, there's often a lot of learning in these more sort of awkward cases, the ones that didn't turn out to be quite so pretty. So Tracy's got a comment there as well. I always wonder how I can include managers. I think one way of putting it is to say that we'll include anybody who's part of the solution. And we can only invite people, and like any invitation, you can accept it or you can decline it. So if we think there's a better outcome, particularly as an external mediator who's been paid to go into an organization, from the organization's point of view, to bring about a resolution to this situation. And if in our wisdom and judgment, you might be better off including, you know, in this case, we've got 5 parties. So if you think you might be better off to include party 6 and party 7 as well, who are the managers who made the decision to bring the 2 new people in, I would put that to the referrer. I'd put it to the organisation and say, in my judgment, it might be helpful to include these 2 people. Now, they can issue the invitation to the individuals. They can encourage them to participate on the basis that the mediator has said you've got more chance of getting a good outcome if you get involved. And those 2 individuals can decline that invitation, or they might just want to meet with the mediators, then decide whether they want to participate. But I would, through the referrer, often go back to an organisation and say it might be helpful if this individual or individuals would meet with the mediators and consider participating in the mediation, because in my judgment, that's going to get you a better outcome. That's the way I'd do it. And we do it quite often. So just by the way, we operate a panel of mediators out there, and our mediators are encouraged and supported often to sometimes phone in, particularly in the team disputes, when it's about how we manage it, how we configure it, who we invite in, liaising with the referrer, and they'll call in to speak to a case manager here around the decisions of how to manage a case. We strongly encourage it. They don't need to use it very often because we use very experienced mediators, mostly with about 10 years post-qualification experience. But occasionally they just want to run it past you. And I think there's no shame in that. It's one of the favourite parts of my job as well, is people calling up, or our case managers' jobs, calling up to say, this has happened, that's happened, what shall we do? Someone's walked out, somebody's turned up with their union rep, somebody's turned up with a whole load of notes to read. I'm just going to flick back through the chat because that was a comment earlier about when people come with a prepared script. It was Tracy responding to Lynn and saying about whether people should prepare for mediations. Tracy saying, I think it would work in circumstances where they're nervous and not able to think on the spot, but sometimes they can come with a pre-prepared script, says Tracy, that doesn't come across as authentic. So, yeah, I mean, it's another thing around case management. Sometimes when we meet with individuals, they say, can I make some notes about what I'm going to say when I get in the joint meeting? Yeah. I don't want people coming along and reading, on last Tuesday, you looked at me funny in the corridor, and, this happened on Wednesday and last March. Not particularly helpful, but it's a nerve-wracking thing to do. And if people feel supported by having a few bullet points just to remind them of things they want to say, I've got no particular problem with that. What we don't want is people taking notes in the session, as we all know, because it breaches the confidentiality and it means you've got something written down that can potentially be discovered. But if people want to bring a few bullet points on a notepad, that's absolutely fine. I would suggest we don't do it on phones and laptops because we've got problems there with confidentiality as well. But in theory, if they're really, really anxious and would feel supported to do that, then whatever they need to participate fully. Okay. Right. And Bassie's saying notes can be read for 5 minutes for the mediator and see how it could be framed on their own perspectives. Okay. Yeah. And I'm not, as a rule, I don't encourage it, but if it means somebody's otherwise not going to be able to participate fully, then we would possibly allow it. Yeah. Okay. Nadine has made a point as well. Is it helpful when there are bullying accusations to reframe in terms of what behaviours are affected? Absolutely. That's what we do. That's mediating. So yeah, there's a lot about reframing, switching the focus from what people say is wrong into what it is they need to be right, and having that dialogue directly with the party whose behaviours they've got an issue with, asking for others to change their behaviours and explaining to those others the impact on yourself of that person's words and behaviours. This is all what reframing is all about. It's about switching that focus and reframing in terms of here's what I need to be right, rather than here's what I allege is wrong. Tracy, you got your hand up again. Let's hear from you again then, please.
Just a really quick story, just brought back a memory for me. And we all ended up having a laugh about it, me as the mediator and the two people in the room. They were really young people, like 20, 21-year-olds. And one of them said they were neurodiverse and they couldn't think on the spot and they wanted to bring their phone with some electronic notes on it. So I made that clear at the start of the meeting that that's what they were doing. The person who they were in the mediation with looked across at them and said, you're not looking at your notes, you're on Instagram. And I've never obviously had this situation before. And I went, are you on Instagram? And she went, sorry. And it actually broke the ice quite a lot. And I was like, so in a way, what I could point out there was some of the behaviors. It was a bit like she doesn't listen to me and she's not she's no good at communicating. And I was like, you're actually showing those behaviors right now. And she was like, yeah, I get it. So it was just a funny story, but it actually
absolutely it broke the ice though. So well, yeah. But I think as a rule, I wouldn't let people bring devices in because you don't know what they're doing. They might
I don't think I will again.
Broadcasting live. They could be on FaceTime or WhatsApp video call to their solicitor for all you know. So we just got to be a bit careful with that. So okay. Right. I don't want to leave anybody with things unsaid. So if somebody's come along today with something they wanted to chip in, they've not yet had a chance to do it. Now's your chance. So anybody else who wants to drop anything in, it might be comments of what we've heard so far. It might be something different altogether, or it might be what you're thinking about doing this weekend. Anyone else want to chip in? We've got a lot of people on. Only a couple of cameras on. Okay. Anybody else want to have a little chip in? I'll have a read back through the chat while I'm asking for anybody else to put their hand up. So we talked about this issue about preparation, about bringing stuff in, about how you configure and how you plan, particularly multiple party mediations. I think they're often the tricky ones, aren't they? I think as a rule of thumb, using two mediators, nothing to be ashamed of. Some services operate solely with pairs of mediators, always co-mediating, particularly some of the neighbourhood services that we've trained, where they're going into people's flats, where there are things that you can't necessarily control, and there might be risk issues that you've not anticipated. So just for safety, going double-handed into mediations for neighbourhood in particular. Workplace, I might be less inclined to use double mediators, although there are some organisations, again, where we've set up internal panels of mediators where they would always work in twos. And it's brilliant for professional development to work with a co-mediator during and at the end of the case, and give and receive feedback. Works really well. Can help with diversity. So instead of just having two mediators of the same identity, you can have two people with conspicuously different identities, which can help where there are, depending on what the case is. So that's brilliant. If you're providing mediation externally and pay as you go, you may need to charge double or 60% more if you're sending two mediators rather than one, which could be, that could impact on the referrer's decision to use you or not, because it's more expensive having two mediators. But certainly with anything, depending on, again, the atmosphere, the temperature of the conflict, 3 or 4 people, I think it would be a good decision to get two mediators involved. We've done mediations here with up to about 35 participants, where we've had to have several mediators involved, and there's a whole big discussion there about how you manage very large groups, particularly using multiple mediators. But yeah, it's nothing to be ashamed of. Actually, it doesn't mean you're not that good. If you have to get a second mediator involved, it's absolutely fine. And the other thing we talked about today is around, as well as those sort of management things, we started to dip into reframing. Nadine's reminding us about the need to reframe in terms of the impact of people's words and behaviours, whether we call it bullying or not, for people to describe the impact of another's words and behaviours, and then the mediator to help that frame to shift into a place of saying, so here's what I need you to do differently, or here's how I would ask you to change what you say and do in order that I don't, feel the ways that I've been feeling. And it's up to that person to respond as they will. Okay. I don't see any other hands. Don't see any other contributions at the moment. It's your last chance. If you did want to say something today, Annette, let's hear from you again, please. Hiya.
Hi, thank you. That's an interesting point. We often co-mediate, and what we've found what I found sometimes is that when you have two mediators, if there is a bold decision to be made, I think you feel safer in doing that, because if one goes in bold, the other one can sort of retract that, and it's like a safety net also. I'm thinking of one case where my co-mediator, it was sort of cultural differences in the background of the issue, and my co-mediator went personal and said to one party, well, this is how you make me feel.
Okay.
And she was well aware of what she was doing, and is very experienced as well. But it had the effect of really making that party think, because we had built up that rapport, and for him to having that effect was really making that change that we needed. But yeah, we were saying afterwards, if that hadn't worked, I would have been able to pick up and sort of continue and let that cool down. If you're on your own, you haven't got the sort of luxury to put that forward. So I think that's another one where it's sort of really difficult, or whether lots of people, it's always helpful, because you're more likely to have to take someone out of the room and sort of manage different groups who are not getting on, where you just need more space and more people to look after people.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Annette. Those of you who know me know my background's in psychotherapy, and that kind of intervention where you talk about the impact that an individual has on you is loosely called self-disclosure. It's what we'd call a high-grade intervention in therapy. It's quite a challenging one to describe the impact that an individual has on you personally. We have to use it very judiciously. And as you rightly point out, it's something that you can only really do when you have established that rapport. When you've established that rapport with the individuals. Without that rapport, that can just sound, it can sound like a criticism or a blame comment. So, yeah, and I would absolutely agree. You know, you've got to have the backup of a trusted co-mediator when you make those high-grade interventions, just in case it doesn't take you to where you need to go. Then you know, you've got that safety net of a co-mediator just in case it doesn't quite have the impact. Okay, I did see your hand, Usha. Usha, UCHE. You seem to have dropped it down. I don't know if we covered your point or if you changed your mind, but
I'm on the road at the moment, so it makes it a bit tricky to speak. Hello, but I just wanted to say something about the point you made about taking advantage of mediation. I was just thinking I do a lot of community mediation, excuse me, to do with tenants in social housing. And sometimes that comes across, you think to yourself, the tenancy officer should have known better than refer this to mediation, because a lot of them come down to just structure of building, which is known to both parties. So you end up, somebody made a point about people saying that the mediation made the issue worse. You sometimes come away feeling like that, because it's almost like you get their hopes up that something is going to come up out of mediation, and nothing does, because sort of saying pull down the building and put up another building, there isn't a lot you can offer. And so ourselves as mediators feel frustrated. The people, as the parties as well, are left feeling frustrated. There isn't a lot you can do to help them. So it just struck me when you said about wrong use of mediation sometimes. Yeah.
It's not always that. Sorry, that your audio is not great. So I think I caught the gist of some of what you were saying, Usha. I didn't catch every word, but yeah, it's not always the right intervention, mediation. And we say to people sometimes it's an experiment. It's not necessarily going to work. There will be some results from it. I mean, the only thing we can really watch out for is that we don't make things worse. And coming back to, you know, what the thing that Dawn mentioned earlier, you know, we've got to just be careful that we're not making things worse. And there's even with individual interventions. So when we're talking about like the high grade intervention that we've just discussed, you got to weigh up risk and benefits. You know, would this take us to a better place? Is there a chance it could take us to a worse place? And you use your judgment and your skill and experience as a mediator to decide that. And sometimes mediation has the potential to make things worse, in which case we would say, no, we're not going to do it. And I think it's the main tool we've got as mediators is our decision and our refusal to continue, or our ability to decline to take on cases. And certainly here, I mean, we have, you know, many referrals a week, and we don't accept every referral. Because we sometimes think the timing's wrong, or the individuals are not in the right mindset, or the referrer has an unrealistic expectation for what could be achieved, and or they don't want to work within the boundaries that we prescribe. So we don't have to take every referral. And I would always, in the initial chat with people in mediation, say, you know, we're doing this because we think it can make things better. It's unlikely to make things worse, but we will stop it if we think it's going to that place. And in social housing, or in any housing really, and working with families who are trying to stay together, which is part of our work, we'll sometimes use a shuttle model, because we're concerned with bringing parties together that it might make things worse. It might raise the temperature too quickly if you get these two warring individuals in the room together, in which case we'll do a shuttle if we're working in real life, or you can do a breakout room shuttle if you're working on Zoom. So lots of judgments to be made is one thing I'm just thinking as a sort of a theme today. You know, there's a lot of judgments we have to make on the fly as we go along as mediators, whether we bring people together at all, who we bring together first, how many mediators we have, how high grade our interventions should be, bearing in mind risks and benefits. So lots and lots of decision making for the mediator to think about all the time, as well as having to manage everything else in the room. Tracy's come back with a point about having as much empathy as you can, as one of Tracy's top tips. Absolutely. And I'll just pick up the point as well about, sorry, I don't know your actual name. Your screen name is Jaylid Better, who says, I'm not a qualified mediator, but I did a one-day course, not tried any mediation yet. What would be your top tips for starting out? Okay. I mean, with the greatest respect, you know, one-day course isn't really a mediator qualification. There's a lot to cover, even in a 40-hour course. So I would suggest, if you are able to, work with an experienced mediator and see what it's actually about. A one-day skills course wouldn't really get you in a place. And I imagine, if I know that course, I imagine there's not any actual assessment on there, not any prolonged assessment anyway. So I think I'd be inclined to work with an experienced mediator and also to do the full training really and get some feedback and assessment before you go into the lion's den, as it were. Tricky, I know sometimes, but I would also make the analogy I mentioned earlier about doing psychotherapy, and there are skills that are transferable between the two disciplines. In counselling and psychotherapy, going back a long time, when I trained counsellors and psychotherapists, we used to talk about the difference between counselling skills and working as a counsellor. Almost like a lowercase c for counselling skills and uppercase C for counsellor. There's a lot of professions and disciplines where counselling skills come in handy and are useful, but actually being a counsellor, big C, is quite a different kettle of fish. And I think there's a really straight analogy there with mediation skills, where there's a lot of the skills that can be used by managers, team leaders, HR professionals, employee relations. Lots of people can use the skills of active listening and reframing, trying to demonstrate impartiality, etc. Useful skills for all those roles. Being a mediator, big M, is something a bit different, and I think it requires quite a thorough training, and often, well, I know that we benefit from the experience of a few cases. Getting started can be frustrating, of course, but if you have the possibility, J-Lid better, work with a trained and experienced mediator, see what it is they do. And Tracy's sort of saying, I'd recommend shadowing. And she would recommend the UK mediation course. Thank you, Tracy. I'd been doing mediation for 4 years before I did it, and it really helped me. Okay, so even though you'd been mediating, doing our training there, it's up to your game, let's say, Tracy. All right. Might be a good place to stop. We try and keep this to around about 3/4 of an hour. I've just gone over a little bit. So much to talk about, isn't there? So much goes on in mediation. Fascinating discipline. I've been doing it a long time. Still keeps my interest. I got quite a low threshold of boredom. This has managed to keep my interest for 27 odd years. And as you probably know, we're celebrating our 25th birthday this year at UK Mediation, which is one of the reasons we've started doing these resolution roundtables. So we will be doing another one again in the future. We've got conversations with a mediator coming up as well, and a couple of Friday webinars scheduled in towards the end of the year as well. Have a look on the website. You can see the whole schedule of what we do with our Friday lunchtimes. Thank you very much for attending and for the comments and bringing case material, which is not necessarily the easiest case material. Brilliant. So, I tried this and it didn't work, or I didn't know what to do in this situation, or I managed it this way and it didn't quite figure out for me. Brilliant. Lots of learning to be had from those sorts of cases. So thanks for all that. Hope to see you all again. Tell your friends. We like to have folks come along to these. It does remind me as well, in your own arrangements, in your own support arrangements, please try and get case supervision for your own work. Please try and get case supervision. We've got like I say, a whole program coming up. There will be a pop to our website. You can see what's around the corner. But meantime, think about your own, even peer support for offloading and getting feedback on your own casework if you can. Okay, have a great weekend. I'll stop talking. I'll go. We'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye for now.